This rally began in 2022, stemming from the events of the Bowen Turner incidents happening in Orangeburg, Calhoun, and Bamberg counties. Bowen Turner was a young man accused of multiple sexual assaults. He was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of assault and battery. The state recommended a probationary sentence with no sex offender registry. The Stoller family, the Best family, and a third unnamed victim continue to suffer and are re-victimized by what they experienced in our judicial system. You may have heard that Mr. Turner was recently rearrested for the 2nd time since he pled guilty in 2022. While he was recently revoked by the Department of Corrections and will be going back to serve at least 6 months, these victims aren't allowed to heal because justice wasn't truly pursued in the first place. And the prosecutor who designed the sweetheart deal, which allowed Mr. Turner to walk free out of the same doors that those victims walked out of in that courtroom, is in this very building begging the legislature for a job as a judge. I ask you, is that truly justice, that these victims cannot heal?
That was Sarah Ford of the South Carolina Victims Assistance Network. Now, she's put this event on for 3 years, and the first 2 focused heavily on Bowen Turner, whose recent rearrest thrust him back into national headlines. But this year's event was not solely focused on Turner, because unfortunately, the injustices that his case put before the whole country are not a one-off here in South Carolina, but rather a way of business. And that was again thrust upon the national news stage when Jeriod Price, the Bloods gang leader who killed Carl Smalls back in the early 2000s, was illegally and secretively released from prison with the help of South Carolina House Minority Leader Todd Rutherford, as well as a sitting circuit court judge and solicitor. The Smalls family, the family of the man who was murdered, have been vocal in their pleas for change in the aftermath of this secretive deal, which they weren't informed of until their son's murderer was back on the streets in direct contravention of the South Carolina Constitution.
This absolute travesty of justice was brought to us by the unlawful firm of Gibson, Rutherford, and Manning. This was an embarrassment to the state of South Carolina and a black eye to the foundation of justice in this state. We want to convey to everyone in this state that this is not just about the Smalls family, but all of us, a family of victims. A family any one of us would gladly give anything not to be a part of. It's about decent, honest, law-abiding citizens who go about their daily business and respect the law and each other. We are here as the Smalls family to let you know that your hurt and your pain is our hurt and pain. We know your dissatisfaction with the system, the level of distrust you have dealing with a system that is heavily tilted toward criminals instead of you. We know what you went through, especially if you lost a loved one through violence, especially a son or a daughter. We move forward because we have to. Life doesn't stop for us, but we will continue to carry our loved ones with us. We go through this roller coaster of emotions, then we come here onto your local district precincts to seek justice. And oftentimes we end up dealing with people with black robes and 3-piece suits on who have no idea what we're going through. That to them, everything is about winning and losing and expanding their own power and prestige, and are beholden to a criminal assistance system, which I call now not the criminal justice system, but a criminal assistance system. And those people are nothing but nicely dressed criminals. This criminal assistance system has to be uprooted and replaced by a system that employs equal scales of justice. Stop letting loyal legislators select judges who they then conveniently appear before.
Now, unlike previous years that we've covered this rally, there is actually legislation moving through the South Carolina General Assembly right now to address this issue. And after the rally, I was able to interview First Circuit Solicitor David Pasco, who has been one of the key champions of judicial reform in South Carolina, to get his take on the two bills currently moving through the State House.
So we have the two bills. One is already passed the Senate. That's S-1046. I'm going to talk about that first because really I'm very disappointed in the Senate bill. The original bill had so much hope in it. It was real good. It took lawyer legislators off of the JMSC, gave the governor appointments. It put no caps on the amount of people that could be found qualified and then go up for election in the legislature. It was a tremendous bill. But as many things in the Senate, they watered it down and almost neutered S-1046. Now, arguably, S-1046 arguably is worse than what we have right now with the JMSC. 1046 puts as many as 8 lawyer legislators on the JMSC. Currently, there are only 4. 60% of the JMSC right now, there are lawyer legislators. Under the Senate bill, it'll go up to 67%. So that's, to me, that's not progress. I am very excited about what's in the House. And I got to tell you, I've been one of Speaker Merle Smith's primary critics, but he has put his money where his mouth is, and he has put forward, as it stands right now, a tremendous bill that is progress and reform, judicial reform. Under the House bill, if it stays the way it is, we'll have 13 members on the JMSC as opposed to the 10. But of those 13, only 4 will be lawyer legislators. The House will get 4 appointments and the Senate will get 4 again, but only a total of 4 can be lawyer legislators. The governor will actually get 5 appointments to the JMSC. And this to me is very important. The governor's appointment will always be the chairman of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. It has to be a retired judge, but that 13th member appointed by the governor will always be a retired judge, not a lawyer legislator. I also like the fact that the House bill creates term limits for JMSC members, and those term limits are retroactive. And interestingly, Dylan, let me tell you this, just to tell you about how cynical I am about the Senate bill. So the House bill makes term limits retroactive to even people that are on the JMSC right now. The Senate bill makes term limits retroactive, but it doesn't apply to Senator Luke Rankin. He gets to stay on the JMSC under this new bill 1046. So, and then finally, the other great thing that the House bill does that the Senate bill doesn't do is it creates an independent agency for the JMSC, whereas in the Senate bill, the JMSC will still be under the thumb of the legislative body.
You can count on us here at FITSNews to keep you updated as these bills move through the State House. But how judges are selected wasn't the only important thing for the General Assembly discussed today. Attorney General Allan Wilson hammered home the point that there is a large funding gap between dollars usually provided by the federal government for organizations which provide attorneys and other services to victims, and what is currently appropriated, as there has been a dried up pool of federal money, as he put it. Now, what he's asking is for members of the General Assembly, specifically those in the Finance Committee, as the House has already passed their budget, to appropriate a stopgap amount of money so that these programs can continue existing until he and other advocates say that the money will continue to flow next year. Here's what General Wilson had to say about that.
5-6 years ago, the VOCA grant, the VOCA money coming from the federal government passing through our office to all of you, was at over $50 million. This year, it's down to $12 million. A couple of years ago, they passed a fix to that federal law that allows us to take settlement money in, and not just fees and fines from around the country, but it's taking longer to replenish those funds. These are funds, this is the lifeblood that keeps many organizations around the state of South Carolina open. We've asked for funding, over $10 million, just as a stopgap until the VOCA money replenishes and it can come flowing back to the state of South Carolina. So I need your help as we advocate for that money to be replenished in our coffers so that we can get them back. And what I've told the legislature is this: you may not want to fund these things because you feel like it's the federal government's job, and it is. But if a small nonprofit victim services organization in a rural community closes, once those doors shutter, once those advocates are gone, that entity is gone forever. It is nearly impossible to bring it back to life. So what I'm asking the General Assembly to do is let's keep them alive. Let's keep them running until we can get the full funding back. And so if you're asking me today, what can we do, Allan, to help you fight for victims? Tell them to support the Attorney General's request for grant funding for victim services in this state. Call their offices and encourage them to support that grant ask, because if we don't get the full funding, or at least what I've asked for, I'm afraid many of our groups are going to not be around next year when the funds do come back from the federal government.
Here at FITSNews, we cover both the South Carolina state budget and victims' rights issues, so you can count on us to keep our eye on this as the budget moves forward. For FITSNews, I'm Dylan Nolan.